of the Houston Federation of Teachers. This evening, we're proud to host one of the HFT and Texas AFT endorsed candidates for the State Board of Education, District 4, Coretta Mallet-Fontenot. Throughout the evening, we'll be having conversations about the issues affecting public schools each day. And Coretta is a classroom teacher, so she is acutely aware of the problems and some of the fixes that we need in our schools. We'll talk about ways to improve our schools, school support for employees, and better educational experiences throughout the state of Texas. We are also engaged in Houston in a wage campaign, and we'll talk more about that. Coretta, welcome to the HFT candidate town hall. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce two of our panelists, Demetrius Jones. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then we'll go to Daniel Santos. And you do the same, Daniel.
Hi, my name is Demetrius Jones. I'm the VP for the Houston Educational Support Personnel over Facility Operations. I look forward to interviewing you tonight.
Thank you, Demetrius and Daniel.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Santos. I am the HFT Executive Vice President, and also I am a classroom teacher 15 years, and I'm looking forward to interviewing Coretta Mallet-Fontenot.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'm going to thank you, Coretta, as well. I will go ahead and give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself. And in that answer, if you could respond to why you decided to run for this office, how will you intentionally go about uplifting public education and advocating for teachers and support staff once you win and get to Austin?
Thank you, President Anderson. I am Coretta Mallet-Fontenot, candidate for State Board of Education, District 4. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother. I have grandkids who are in Houston ISD public schools. I'm a product of HISD schools. I'm also a 23-year career educator in Houston ISD. I have dedicated a great portion of my life to supporting public education. I've been a PTO president, and it's important for me to run for this particular race because, as we all know, public school educators and public education in general have been under great attack. We've seen so many different laws and bills being passed that are doing more harm in the classroom than they are good. And as President Anderson often likes to say, if you don't have a seat at the table, then that typically means that you're on the menu. And I don't want to see that happen to us. I feel that it's time for teachers to stand up, to be our best and strongest advocate, because who better knows what we need in the classroom than a current classroom teacher such as myself. And in regards to being intentional about supporting public school education, there are some things that I am looking at in terms of, and I know we'll get into this a little more deeply throughout the interview, is that we need to revisit those social studies TEKS. They have all but whitewashed people of color, women, indigenous people from the contributions that we have made to this country. Even now, with me running for this particular race, this is still a very historic moment to have someone who's currently in the classroom seeking this position and hopefully winning to go on to represent, District 4 and making sure that we hold our counterparts in the legislature accountable. You know, some of them on the Public Education Committee have written these draconian laws, and we have to go back and say, no, let's revisit that. We need to address these things, and we need those things done now.
Thank you, Coretta. You mentioned challenges of that the public education system is under attack. This is going to be a monumental challenge for you and anyone that serves on the State Board of Education. What are some potential challenges you see, and how will you go about trying to overcome those challenges?
One of the things I recognize is that I would be working with people who have a vastly different background professionally. So that means that it's going to be very, very important that I share real world, current classroom, day-to-day experiences with my hopefully fellow State Board of Education members, so that they understand when they enact TEKS or agree with the legislature on certain laws, they have to seriously consider the real world implications of what that means. You know, when we tell our children something, they trust us because we're adults, and they trust us to tell the truth and to guide them into what's right and what's fair and what's just and what's equitable. And it's important that as we, you know, move into this realm of SBOE, that I'm not walking into this with rose colored glasses. I know it's going to be an uphill battle. I fully recognize it's going to be a challenge, but oftentimes it's that communication, being able to share, you know, personal experiences that can make the difference in shaping people's opinions.
That's so true, Coretta. You know, as an educator and as a union member, we know, you know, I say that once an educator, always an educator. I retired after 33 years. So I still, the teacher in me is still there, and it always will be. I know that you know, as well as we all do on this call, having worked in the field of education, there is a thing called flexibility, but we also know that it takes a team to get anything done. So it's coming on to the State Board of Education as a new member, you would have to form relationships. And that's one thing we all know as teachers and educators, anybody who works, when I say educators, I mean anybody that works in a school. You're an educator. You're educating somebody. You're educating the children. You're educating the faculty. You're educating somebody. So I want to make that clear. When I say educators, I mean anybody that works in a school. We know that you have to form relationships. That's going to be so important. And I'm happy that you realize going into this role, when you go into this role, the first thing you're going to have to do is form relationships with your colleagues. Daniel?
What, can I just piggyback on that, President
Sure.
Anderson, for just a second? I'm glad you mentioned that. You know, one of the things that I have seen on the national level is how politics has become so polarized and people aren't talking to each other, they're talking at each other. And one of the things that I have done, even, you know, on my campus, on other boards and committees that I've served on, is to make sure that I engage people that have a different opinion from me. You know, we may not always agree on everything, but typically we find some level of common ground so that we can keep the ball moving forward. And I just want to, you know, share that, you know, those relationships are absolutely essential.
Yes, they are. Daniel?
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Coretta. Thank you as a social studies teacher. And I hope that I speak for many social studies teacher is standing firm and steadfast with the notion that we cannot whitewash and we cannot dilute history. And I think it's going to, your voice at the table is going to be quite essential. So I want to ask some questions to help dispel the myth and this false narrative about critical race theory that is being used as a boogeyman to deny teachers like myself from teaching real accurate history. What kind of plan or ideas do you have to combat the classroom censorship attack on educators, referring to the false narrative that is being spun around critical race theory? How will you approach the work in updating the TEKS with the legislature regarding social studies, which will directly impact me and thousands of social studies teachers across the state?
And let me just say this, Daniel, it's not just social studies teachers that are going to be impacted, because I teach English, but in that, I also teach that from a historical perspective, because we look at the context in which writers wrote certain pieces of literature. And so having a plan is absolutely essential. And it's actually a two-pronged plan. And one of that, one component is definitely working to build and forge, you know, a relationship with the Public Education Committee. That's extremely important. As we all know, Dr. Alma Allen is on that committee. And, you know, I live in her district. She has endorsed me. And so that is a relationship that I would definitely look at leveraging. And then on the other side, on the State Board of Ed side, we just have to go in and give a real account and real world implications of what we're teaching our children and say, hey, no, we have to go back and revisit these teachings. How can you teach history where you don't include people that look like me? You don't have, significant and major historical contributions of women of color, of indigenous people. You cannot be teaching history that only includes a small segment of the population and having our kids think that it's normal for them not to see themselves or their ancestors in history. That's not accurate, and we have to address that. We know that America has a complicated history, but we don't shy away from that. In order to make that change, we have to have those very challenging, very sometimes difficult conversations. We are an inclusive society. We are a very diverse society. And even before America was formed, and I'm no history teacher, let me say that, but I have read a lot about history because of my interest in politics. And so one of the things that I do know is that, there was a lot of trading and intermingling and doing business, from the continent of Africa to what is now, America. And so you have to include that in the history, but you cannot just say, oh, well, these people just popped up out of nowhere. Because that leaves kids to wonder, well, how do I fit into this American ideal or the so-called American dream? We can't leave that to chance. Kids have to be able to see themselves and see their historical value in the textbooks that they're reading.
That's so true. That's so true, Coretta. When I was growing up, my parents used to say, if you don't know your history, you're destined to repeat it. And so it's very important that we educate our children about their history and the significant contributions that they have made. Daniel, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, just a short one. And thank you, Coretta, for reminding us that our country is better because of the diversity. And I think poll after poll, some recent ones, parents agree with you. They accept and they welcome that diversity in not only social studies classrooms, but in reading classrooms and in other classrooms that welcome diversity. How important is it then for parents who stand with us, the great majority, and believe in what you believe? How important is it for them to come out next week and speak their values by voting? How important is it so that the false narrative doesn't replace their values?
I often tell people that your vote is your voice. This is how you make the legislature and different governing bodies recognize and respect what you want to see happen in our country today, and particularly in my race for State Board of Education District 4. As parents, I'm encouraging all parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors, get out and vote. Take 2 or 3 people with you. You need to recognize that the undergirding, the underpinning of our country is rooted and grounded in public education. Educated people are what help to keep the country growing and improving and getting better and having all these different innovations. You can't continue to grow without being educated. We don't want to become a stagnated country. And we've seen those stats to show, how we're lagging behind in different areas. We have to make a real investment in our kids. And now is the time to do that by voting for me. Early voting begins May 16th through May 20th. Election day is May 24th. It's very important that we have people in place that truly, truly want the best for our kids.
That's so true, Coretta. And when you speak about being respected, teachers and educators, I'm going to say educators, because like I said, when I say educators, I mean everybody working in the school, from the principal down to from the custodian up to the principal. I put it like that because everybody has a significant part to play. We feel so disrespected. We feel undervalued by the powers that be. When you are elected, how will you ensure that experienced, highly qualified educators and school employees are respected and included in the debates and policies adopted by the SBOE?
So, President Anderson, so one of the things that, as you just stated, the State Board of Education is responsible for is setting the standards for teacher certification. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is revisit that process. You know, we must go back and look at how we are, making certain demands. Why would we make it harder for people to become educators at a time when we are having a serious teacher shortage? We need more highly trained, highly qualified, certified teachers in our classrooms, in our buildings, principals, administrators, everyone. It takes all of us to get the job done. And we can't dilute that. It's very important that we have knowledgeable people who stand in front of our kids, who deliver content and who guide them throughout their day-to-day, school life. We have to. I cannot stress that enough. We have to fight back and push back on this idea that becoming a teacher has to be extremely difficult. I recall the time when it was mandatory that you be certified. So we should not be watering it down, because with that certification comes, a qualifying statement that you are ready to teach. You are ready to stand before a classroom full of other people's children that you've taken on as your own, okay? And deliver content and instruction in a very effective manner so that they can be successful and that they're able to read and write and comprehend and analyze information and produce all types of projects and things to demonstrate mastery of their content. We cannot water that down.
That's so true. And speaking of being accountable, Coretta, the charter schools in Texas account for 3.6 billion in public school funding, but aren't accountable to local elected school boards or voters. This lack of accountability has led to serious abuses with charter school operators paying for skybox tickets, private planes, and advertising with taxpayer dollars. What will you do to oversee the charter school system in Texas and protect the taxpayers from these abuses?
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was building a relationship with members of the Public Education Committee, because one way we can address this is through the law. We can have, and push for laws that tighten the reins on these charter school operators. It's very important that charter schools be held accountable, both financially and academically. We know oftentimes they're not producing kids that are ready to go on to college and career, even though they boast this, a certain level of graduation rate. And then when I talk to people who teach at the collegiate level, they're saying, no, they're not ready. They're not ready. And you can tell what schools are, sending kids here and there. And so we have to absolutely address that. We have to. And then when we look at our role on the SBOE, we are also tasked with approving or vetoing new charter school applications. And so why would you expand or allow a charter to expand if they have not already demonstrated, mastery of what they have now in terms of finances and academics? I think now is the time for us to put in place measures through the application process, as well as through the legislature. And then, looking at those bad charter operators and making sure that we're holding them accountable. We have to put measures in place that hold them accountable for addressing financial responsibilities and state accountability responsibilities, just like our traditional public schools have to do. We have to also hold charter school operators to the same accountability. It is ridiculous and it is unconscionable for them to use public dollars. These are our tax dollars These are our tax dollars, and we all should be demanding that they be held accountable.
That is so true.
Thank you, Coretta, for that response. But what we would like to know as well is what makes you uniquely qualified to stand up for the voice of educators on the SBOE?
Wow, such a great question. And I often get asked this question. First of all, the experience that I bring is current, it's relevant. Secondly, I have experience in writing curriculum, in delivering curriculum. I have experience in dealing with large budgets. So I understand that process as well. And then furthermore, I have been in leadership positions throughout the district in various different roles. And even on my campus, my principal oftentimes will come to me and ask me for information or what do I think? So which also indicates how respected I am, in my role as well. One of the things, and I keep going back to the relationship piece, because that was important to me. A lot of times people think you have to have this combative relationship in order to move the goalposts forward. But oftentimes it really takes a more collaborative approach, to making sure that we're in place to get things done. I am uniquely qualified for this position because, as I stated before, I bring current, real world, day-to-day classroom experience to this position. I am going to be an advocate for our kids as well as our school employees. And I believe that we can do both. We can do right by our children by providing them a world-class education, which they deserve. And we can also do right by our school employees by providing them not just a living wage, but a thriving wage. I won't stop advocating for that because that impacts all of us. It impacts how we build generational wealth for our children as well, how we pay for them to go to college, how we pay for ourselves, because I'm still in college myself. I'm in a doctoral program. So this impacts how I live my life day to day as well. That absolutely has to be a priority.
Thank you.
Coretta, you said you were in a doctoral program. I'm just thinking you have your hands full. You're a full-time teacher, you're in a doctoral program, you work in your community. Tell us a little bit about how you plan to assume this, because people think, oh my gosh, she's doing so much. How's she going to do this? Tell us about what you do.
So first of all, I've always done a lot. So this is just how I live my life. I was raised to be a servant, serving in my community. I serve in my church. And so this is just a natural extension. I look education for me, being a teacher, is just a natural extension of being a servant. So moving to the State Board of Education, again, it's just another level of being a public servant. And how I manage that, you manage that in a couple of ways. HISD does have a political leave policy, which I do plan to take advantage of should the need arise. But also, I'm a person who has been able to balance all of this. I work full time. I come home in the evenings. I do meetings. I meet with different civic clubs. I attend union meetings. I attend church meetings. So this is how I live my life. And I want to be an example to others out there who are thinking, well, how can I do this? If you want it bad enough, you'll make time for the things that are important to you. And this is important to me. So I have made sure to make time for it. I didn't just think of this, this election cycle. This is something I have thought about, quite frankly, throughout my career as an educator. I can go back to my days at Texas Southern when I saw Dr. Alma Allen, come and speak to us when she was then serving on the State Board of Education. Anything that is going to be, value, showing that we value our kids and showing that we value each other as school employees, we have to make time to make sure that we are in those positions, because oftentimes they have people who don't understand what it's like to serve in a school. So we have to be that voice. We have to be in a position to advocate for ourselves. I have done this my entire, probably since middle school. I've always done multiple things. Even when I was in high school, I went to school on Saturdays. I was bused, so I got up early in the morning, went to school, rode the bus, did my homework on the bus ride home. I mean, every minute of the day has a value. And I have always lived my life in a very structured way. So for me, I tend to be very organized. So it works well for me.
Okay, so someone put in the chat that what about bus drivers? We have more often our share of being overworked and underpaid. Maintenance workers, cafeteria workers, custodial workers, these are all people that are much a part of the school district as teachers, but they don't get any credit. If you're not a teacher, you're often overlooked. And I do understand. Um, that's why I said, to me, everybody that opens that door and punches that clock at a school is an educator. But there are concerns, and it goes along with the disrespect that educators are receiving across this state, maybe even across this nation. But I'm just focusing on Texas. It's just it, and this is why we have our dignity and respect campaign going on right now. When I talk to HISD, when I talk to trustees, when I say educators, I'm speaking of everyone who steps in that school. I don't care what your job is, you're educating somebody. And everyone in that school, from the bus driver to the cafeteria worker to whoever is in that school, has some type of impact on the students. Children cannot learn in a dirty, filthy environment. They cannot learn if they are hungry. We can't teach them if they don't get to school. And some of them, that's the only place they get a full meal. That's the only place they get structure. And so when I advocate for everybody. And I'm sorry, we say educators, educators, and I guess we have to drive home the fact that everybody who works in that school is some type of an educator. Coretta, I mean, I don't know what you can do, but maybe you can talk a bit about how you feel about the other people who feel left out. Because as I said before, there's just such a profound sense of disrespect for everyone who works in school these days. It's just everything that happens good, the celebration stops in the main office. But when something bad happens, it trickles down to the classroom and to the students and to the teachers. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you can do on the State Board of Education to help change the culture across the state.
So again, as I stated before, President Anderson, it's very important that members of the State Board of Education understand not only what I do as a classroom teacher, but understand what my kids have to go through just to get to school. Oftentimes, we all talk about all the many hats that we wear. We help feed children. Remember, during the beginning of the pandemic, bus drivers were taking food to kids. So let's not forget that was a very, very, very valuable resource, and it really helped a lot of families stay afloat. And bus drivers, cafeteria workers who were preparing the lunches and the breakfasts, the wraparound specialists who were helping to deliver them, they all deserve respect. And so like you, when I advocate for all of us, because keep in mind, I started my career in education as an instructional aide. I worked in the office at J.R. Reynolds Elementary School. And we had the old mimeograph machines. And when we got a copy machine, the secretary wouldn't even let us use it. She was the only one allowed to make copies. But I say that to say, when teachers were late, if there was traffic or an accident, I had to go cover that class. So I understand how, clerical staff and paraprofessionals and bus drivers feel. Additionally, I was, believe it or not, wait for it, a crossing guard. So, yes, I stood in the rain. I had my little red sign. I could barely hold it up, but I had my little red sign. I was out there crossing kids, and I got a chance to see, some of the bad driving that occurs in our school zones. And so when I became a teacher and a parent, especially at elementary school, and we would do dismissal, and, sometimes we would walk the kids out to the curb to get them to their parents. Or when I taught middle school, we did bus duty in the afternoons. I have been a part of all of that in some, shape, fashion, or form. In middle school, we had cafeteria duty. So while the cafeteria ladies were serving the food, teachers we were in the cafeteria making sure everything was quiet, it was calm, you could do your job, kids were not acting up, and everybody had an enjoyable lunch period. I have served in just about every role, and I've even been a custodian. I've been a custodian, not an HISD, but that was a time when I was in college when I would clean office buildings at night, for work, because I needed to make money. So I understand that, and I value, every position, every person, regardless of what your title is. You have an impact on our kids. And yes, we absolutely all deserve respect. One job depends on another. We all make things go smooth for the next person in doing whatever it is that they do. Yes, we all deserve, like I said before, not just a living wage, because we don't want to just live. We want to thrive. We want to do like the administrators. We want to travel across the world. We want to send our kids to college. We want to be able to afford a mortgage and not just rent. And there is a difference. And I often tell my kids, there's a difference between having, a job that you love and respect, or a career, and just doing something to get by. When you're doing something to get by, you're living. And that limits how you live. We deserve the respect and the pay that allows us to thrive. And understand this, I have said this to board members. I have said this. Now, going to the State Board of Education, where you take that conversation would have to be to the Public Education Committee, because they make these laws. They deal with school, how schools are funded. Now, SBOE funnels the money, through the Permanent Education Fund, Permanent School Fund. But we have to make sure that our legislature is not trying to take away our tax dollars, as we just had this vote about, increasing the property tax amount that you could deduct from $25,000 to $40,000. So just imagine taking away that extra amount of money from thousands of homes. That's definitely going to impact public education. So we all have to make sure that when we stand together, and we're united. We're not divided. We speak with the same voice. And we have the same message. We all want the same thing. We're going to have to work together. We're going to have to deal with people that we may not always agree with, but we have to learn to find common ground. No, we don't always get what we want. And that's something that I've learned from serving on the HFT board. We don't always get everything that we want, but it's important to hold these people's feet to the fire so that we can at least get something, and hopefully we can move beyond that to get everything. I feel like we deserve it all because we give so much of ourselves. We deserve that respect. We deserve it. We've earned it. We're not asking for a handout. We have put the work in all of these different positions, and there's no reason why they should not be able to pay us. I was looking at the job board today, and I saw they're hiring director of this, a director of schools, director of that. They're hiring all of these different positions. And I'm thinking to myself, this sounds like we're just recreating the same old wheel. We're finding, ways with the different title to move money, but to keep it out away from the classroom. There was a time when it was required that the majority of the money be spent in the classroom, meaning on the students and paying the teacher. If you want highly qualified bus drivers, cafeteria workers who look at themselves as professionals, who deserve to have ongoing training so that they can stay current and up to date, you have to pay for that. People nowadays have choices. And if we didn't learn anything from the pandemic, we learned people have choices, and they will walk away from education because they understand the value that they bring to the table. We can no longer can we just sit there and say, oh, well, we don't have the money. Well, that's not my problem. You better go find it. You better go find it. If you want us, I talked to someone today who is, looking to work in other districts. People are saying, I cannot live, and not just, hourly employees, but classified employees are saying, I cannot afford a mortgage on what I'm making as a teacher. It's important that we make sure we are speaking up for, all of us, that we stand together, that we hold these school boards accountable, that we also hold the legislature accountable for funding us properly. They can put more money into public education. It has to be a priority, and it only becomes a priority if we demand it. If we put the pressure on them and say, hey, our kids are important to us, and we know that they are the future. So now it's the time for you to invest in them by also investing in me, by investing in bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodial staff, electricians, maintenance workers. And keep in mind, and I'll share a funny story with you. As a new mom, I had two, daycare age kids, and that daycare was just eating, my whole paycheck pretty much. And I was thinking, gosh, I got to find a way to make some more money. And I was just at my wit's end, and I was looking to going into the maintenance department because, believe it or not, what was then called the zone manager was making like $42,000, and I think I was making something like 31,000 and paying, like $1,000 daycare for two kids. And that doesn't even include me having to buy their formula. I had to bring their milk. I had to buy their diapers. None of that was provided. So I still had to stretch my budget to make that work. So yes, we are all in this together, and we have to stand united, and we have to hold those that need be accountable.
That's correct. Thank you, Coretta. Daniel, I think you had a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you. So Coretta, I want to circle back to the theme of respect and the value of voices from various stakeholders, right? We enumerated a number of stakeholders, and there's one group of stakeholders that we've witnessed in the past 6 months since the various challenges against public schools, specifically with banning books, further marginalizing the histories of groups of people. We've seen students, a lot of young students coming out advocating for their right to be heard, to learn accurate history, to read books that reflect their cultures. So what plan do you have, or do you, or how valuable will it be to you to reach out when you become a state board of education rep, to reach out to those young people who are voicing more and loudly the need to learn about their history, the need to be heard, the need to be respected just to exist? How would you reach out to them so that you can hear their voice also, and so they could also feel respect?
So one of the ways that, I plan on including young people, not just, K through 8, but, college age as well, is because keep in mind, they're coming up, those kids have come up through the public education system as well. So, and they have siblings in the system. We have to remember that they think just a little bit differently sometimes than we do. And we can't always, negate their voices. We have to make space for them. And then there have to be opportunities set aside to have, round table discussions and have a concerted effort through surveys, having them serve, and give their ideas on different committees and things of that nature as well. There's definitely a space, for the youth that are in our school system. And we definitely have to, sometimes you have to kind of push the envelope a little bit to make an even greater space for them. We know in Houston ISD, we used to have a system like that. It has sort of, gone awry, if you will. But I'm definitely a proponent of that. I talk to my students often, and sometimes even when I'm planning a lesson and I want to get their feedback, and I'll say, well, guys, do you want to do this, or do you think this might be a better way for you all to be able to understand the information? Now, keep in mind, I'm still the teacher. I'm still the person in charge, but there is a time and a place for me to include their voices, to value what they think and how they think they can best learn. And oftentimes, believe it or not, they do have really good ideas. And they love collaborating. Not all school age kids want to be in an adversarial relationship with their teachers or administrators or, the adults that they encounter throughout the school day. There are those who really, look to having, constructive conversations. And so that's very important.
Yes, it is, Coretta. I'm a firm believer that you put your money where your priorities are. And I also believe that you cannot take care of students without taking care of teachers. And so the HFT has launched a dignity and respect campaign. We are asking the district to pay us our worth. Long For the past few years, we have not gotten any significant raises from HISD. And one year we even had to launch a campaign to get the step increase. They had actually removed the step increase from the pay scale. And so that is why HFT has launched a campaign of dignity and respect, demanding basically that HISD pay us what we are worth. We're asking for a minimum of 10% on our paychecks this year. Our slogan is put your respect on my check.
Absolutely.
And we are asking every member, non-member, to be at the board meeting on Thursday. It's probably too late now to sign up to speak, but we will have another meeting. They will have another meeting in June. Come out, wear your red HFT t-shirt. Come out and show your face, even if you don't speak. We will have speakers there, but there's strength in numbers. The time is now for educators, and y'all want me to say bus drivers, custodial. It's time for us to stand up and demand the respect that we deserve. We carry schools. You can do whatever you want to do, but you got to have a teacher in that school. Because who's going to teach if you don't have a teacher there? Somebody has to teach. So it is time for us to demand the respect that we deserve. We're asking everyone to please come to the board meeting wearing your HFT red shirt. We normally have shirts for people who show up for our actions to put on, because we want to make a strong showing in this boardroom. I'm going to be speaking. I have also been talking to some of the trustees and the superintendent about the 10% minimum increase that we're demanding. We have to stand up. We cannot keep lying down and expecting for anybody to give us anything. We have to let them know we want to be respected, and we want it to be in our checks.
Absolutely.
So we're inviting each and every one to come out to the meeting, speak to your trustees. If you know who they are. If you don't, call the HFT office. We can tell you who your trustee is. Send your trustee a note. Send them an email. Give them a call. Let them know. We want 10%. We want to see a significant pay increase. The district is proposing something over a 3-year period. The budget is approved annually. and we want it now. That's good. So I just want to encourage everyone to help us out. We can't do this alone. When I stand up to speak, or Daniel stands up to speak, we do it all the time. They start picking up their phones because they know what we're gonna say. But I remember one of the cafeteria workers being at a board meeting one night. They were talking about the budget, and she said, "I want to be able to buy a name brand loaf of bread." That was years ago, and I still remember that today. It is your story. When they hear you say how you feel and how you want to be respected, that touches the soul. I still remember that. I still remember when one of our board members that is a para got up to talk about the fact that he wants to be able to take his family out to eat at a restaurant sometime. So, it's very important that they hear from you. They want to know. I mean, they know what I'm going to say. They know what Daniel, they know what Coretta, they know what people who come all the time. But it is very impactful when they hear your voice and hear you speak. So I want to thank you, Coretta, for standing up to take on this challenge. This is a very monumental job. I didn't realize how much was involved in this until I started trying to keep up with you. I started out my career as a paraprofessional too. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I understand what parents are going through. This is why I advocate so hard for them. And this is the first year. I'm going to take some credit under my watch that the parents in HISD got a stipend. I kept fighting for that the entire summer. We took it to consultation. We kept fighting it. I didn't let it go. When school was out, I was still on that phone calling because I believe that the district can do better by us. And we're going to demand that. So, Coretta, I think you will do it. You will help us. People have to be in higher offices. We can only do so much, but laws are made in Austin. And that's where we have to hold people accountable. And so we have to have people in those offices to help us. We can't do all of that here because laws are set in Austin. So, Coretta, I want to thank you for coming and spending this evening with us. I know you are hopping around all over. Your district is how many people? How many?
I think it's like 984,000. It's almost a million. And it was
Yes,
over
ma'am.
a million. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. 1 point something million people.
But it was 984,000, I think, voters.
Yes. And so that's a large area for you to cover, try to touch bases, try to talk to people, try to get the word out. So you can help Coretta get the word out in your family, in your church, in your community. You can tell people about Coretta. It's one Coretta, but it's many of us. And HFT alone, we have 6,000 members. So we can get the word out. We need to tell everybody we know, vote for Coretta, because we'll have a champion to help us in Austin. And that's what we need. We have some other endorsed candidates that we can't vote for, but I was telling them last night, if we can get Coretta and Laura and Pete, we'll have three. We'll have three. And that's where we can start. You have to start somewhere. So, Coretta, thank you for coming, spending the evening with us. I want to thank our other attendees for coming. Says remind you to check the chat for volunteer opportunities. Coretta is still taking donations. These signs cost money. These pretty mailers cost money, and nobody's doing those for free. That big background she has in the back, they cost money. And we have to put out, like I said, you put your money where your priorities are. And so we have to help people like Coretta and other people that we have endorsed to get into these offices. But then guess what? I know Coretta's phone number. I know where she lives. When I need help at the SBOE, I'm going to be calling Coretta. She can't get away from me.
And I'll definitely be answering.
So thank you for coming, Coretta. Let's see, make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Does anybody else have any closing? Coretta, you can close after everybody. If anybody else has anything, then Coretta, you can close us out.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity again to talk with everyone and have an opportunity to share, my ideas and my vision for serving on the State Board of Education District 4, to being the person who will be there to represent us, to fight for us and our kids, to fight for us as school employees. Keep in mind, as President Anderson said, you have to put your money where your mouth is. If you say education is important to you, you want the best, you want a good working environment, then I'm asking you to please consider donating to my campaign. These signs, as President Anderson said, they're not cheap. The mailers aren't cheap. And so we really, really need your support. I'm not taking any money from charter schools and things of that nature. So I'm depending on you all, fellow educators, those of us who are out here in the field, in the classroom, on the bus, knocking door to door as a wraparound specialist. I'm depending on you all to help support and fuel this campaign. This campaign isn't just about me, but it's about all of us. And all it takes is for us to get one in. And then, as we know, as one gets in, we can put another and another and another. And that's how we work to build power. Let's be clear. This is about us having power so that we can make sure that our work environments, that what we're teaching our kids is true, that we teach them to value science and to respect science and to trust the science that they're being taught. So please consider donating. You can go to Coretta4SBOE4.com. You can donate via PayPal, or you can Zelle to Coretta Mallet-Fontenot at gmail.com. That is linked to my campaign account. It does not go to me personally. It goes straight to the bank, and I have to account for every penny to the state of Texas. So I would appreciate your vote. Take 2 or 3 people with you. And please consider donating. Thank you.
Thank you, Coretta. I saw somebody put in the chat, all hands on deck. So whenever I'm having staff meetings with my beloved staff and I need everybody there, I say, all hands on deck. And they know that I'm going to be there, and they're all expected to be there too. And so this is one of those times, it's all hands on deck. We got to get out. We got to work. We got to talk. We got to communicate. We have to form relationships, and we have to make sure that everybody knows we're in a very critical time right now, and we're under serious attack. So what do educators do? They stand up and fight back. Okay, so let's get busy. To those of you at home, this concludes our program for the evening. We'd like to thank everyone for attending Texas AFT Virtual Town Hall. We strongly encourage you to check the chat. Well, you can call our office at 713-623-8891 for phone bank opportunities to volunteer to help our endorsed candidates get elected, to support the work and become a member of the greatest union in the world, texasaft.org/membership. Good night, everybody.
Good night.